Kyoto Protocol dead or alive? Can the Durban Climate Change Conference resurrect the world's only legally binding agreement on curbing carbon emissions? Time is running out and the mood is pessimistic. This week on Environment, we're investigating what's really at stake. Coming up, the clock is ticking. Durban offers a last chance to decide the future of the protocol. We take a look at the chances of Kyoto Part 2. Next, heating up their habitat. French researchers use artificial means to test the effect of a warmer climate on different animal species. And finally, while one island disappears, another reappears. We head to the Ganges Delta, where climate skeptics claim the moving river is a natural part of life. Cities can and do play a large role in reducing carbon emissions, but they're also major emitters. In Paris alone, 3 million cars pass each day, and this sensor measures exactly how much pollution there is in the air. I'm joined by Arthur Depart from Air Paris. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Can you tell me what is it exactly that you're measuring in here?
We measure several air pollutants that affect health, including nitrogen dioxide and other polluting particles that are above permitted levels for roads in the Parisian area.
And is there any link between what you're measuring in here and climate change and global warming?
There is a link between the pollutants we monitor and greenhouse gas emissions. They have common sources such as road traffic, industry, and heating systems. But they have different effects. Greenhouse gases have a global effect, while air pollutants have a local effect on health. It's important to tackle both at the same time to reduce pollution and greenhouse gas emissions.
Merci, Arthur. Of course, ideas to reduce our impact on the environment are on the agenda in Durban, but it's been overshadowed by the most pressing matter of the conference, whether to extend the Kyoto Protocol on curbing greenhouse gases.
It's in Kyoto 1997 that the world finally adopts its first legally binding agreement on fighting climate change, hence its name, the Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto is a pact under which 37 industrialised nations and the European community agreed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Not all of the countries went on to ratify the document, notably the United States, at the time the world's largest polluter. The rest were assigned an emission target, aimed at limiting global warming to less than 2 degrees from pre-industrial levels. It meant slashing output by an average of 5% from 1990 before the end of 2012. Developing countries, on the other hand, were left to make cuts on a voluntary basis.
Today it's voluntary commitments which are often even stronger than those from the countries obliged under the Kyoto Protocol, in particular China, Brazil and India. These are countries which try to do a lot. One day these commitments will have to become mandatory.
The European community, armed with its robust green energy program and carbon trading scheme, is well on track to meet its Kyoto target. At the other end of the scale, Canada, which has already conceded it will fail, its lucrative oil from tar sands industry contributing heavily to its greenhouse gas output.
We are very far from the objectives necessary to reduce greenhouse gas output and stabilize the climate. At the same time, these objectives are very difficult. We're not at all in a stable situation with respect to our emissions. From this point of view, the protocol is not enough, but without it, would we be in a worse position? Probably.
At a climate change conference in Cancun last year, environmentalists launched an appeal for leaders to give the protocol a second life. But while there's been much talk of Kyoto Part 2, very few governments are open to the idea.
The conference in Durban will unite all those against it. There will be opposition to binding targets from emerging countries like China and India. The United States, Japan, Australia and Canada are also opposed. Europe is all alone. Basically, failure seems guaranteed, unfortunately.
Many of the leading negotiators have also entered the talks with pessimism, fearing Kyoto is a protocol bound to become an artefact of history.
At this safari park just outside of Paris, there's a whole host of African animals clearly living outside their natural habitat. Life is obviously much colder for these elephants in France, but warmer temperatures are a much more serious problem for animals around the world. It's estimated that around 1 in 10 species could be on the brink of extinction by the end of the century because of global warming. Researchers in France have taken matters into their own hands by altering the temperature and monitoring the effect.
A strange sight in the middle of the French countryside. The Metatron, as it's known, is a series of linked cages filled with butterflies and lizards. Their every move is monitored by the scientists of this unconventional laboratory.
We can control the climate in each of the 48 cages. We can modify the temperature, either by giving more or less shade, or by putting the sprinklers on.
The animals react accordingly, either adapting to these new conditions or fleeing them. Their means of escape, long corridors linking the various cages. Migration as well as well-being and population numbers are all monitored on a regular basis.
It can have a positive effect on reproduction, on breeding seasons, and the growth of the young.
Scrutinised, measured and weighed, the slightest change is recorded. As cold-blooded creatures, lizards are more sensitive to temperature change, and researchers hope to learn from them the long-term consequences of global warming on the world's fauna.
We believe it will have a positive effect for individuals, but a negative impact for the species as a whole.
Including extinction?
Yes, for some species.
In here, they're migrating, and fast. 10 centimetres an hour towards colder climes. That's 2 to 3 times faster than scientists predicted 10 years ago.
It's especially the young that will disperse, leave their homes, heading to new lands.
The findings of this experiment are worrying, further proof, if needed, that the heating up of our planet will have alarming consequences.
Here along the Seine in Paris, there's evidence of changing water levels over time. Imagine if you were here in 1910 when the water rose all the way to the top of this building. Well, Paris isn't really at risk of rising sea levels right now. Other tropical islands in the Ganges Delta appear to have at least temporarily disappeared. Climate skeptics say it isn't evidence of climate change, just a body of water constantly on the move.
This is the story of a small island in the Ganges Delta and how it rose and disappeared to international fame.
Look, that's Lower Chara.
In 2006, press around the world highlighted the plight of Lower Chara. It was a dramatic victim of climate change, the first island to have been completely submerged. In the 70s, 4,000 people lived here, but one by one, they all left. Niranjan Pramanik organised the original exodus from the island in 1972. He's brought us here today to show us a remarkable sight. The island that he spent more than half his life on is slowly re-emerging.
At one time, there were trees here. There were people, there were houses. My house was swallowed by the water. Some other families stayed on, but eventually everything went under. So everyone had to leave the island, slowly, slowly, slowly. 110 families in the end.
For the last few years, Lower Chara has been slowly rising through the water. Some have already begun to find subsistence on the island. It is an emphatic rebuttal to predictions that 20% of the islands in this delta will be submerged over the next 30 years. This oceanographer in Kolkata has consistently argued against those predictions. Tuhin Ghosh has used satellite images to study the Ganges for 17 years.
Whenever we are going for the 2010 image, we are having the Lower Chara again emerging on the sea. This is a common thing whenever a lot of sediments are coming in the estuary, lot of islands will disappear, lot of islands will emerge.
So why so many people talked about climate change?
Because these are very simple to tell. Because there is no study in the river hydrodynamic condition. So this is very simple and very catchy to the media also.
A position that's difficult to confirm within the scientific community, but one that's backed up by the refugees of Lower Chara. They no longer believe that climate change caused their island to disappear.
They'd built the port of Haldia upstream from us. So that ships could access it more easily, they created a channel that diverted the current in our direction. That's what swallowed the island. We don't consider ourselves victims of climate change.
For the moment, Lohachara is once again a sliver of sand fighting against the tide. But Tuhin Ghosh believes it could be ready for habitation within 20 years.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Thanks for joining us, and we'll keep you updated on the Durban conference as the major events unfold. I'll see you next time.